Hey now, I hope you're doing fine. I want to talk to you about my favorite farm tool, the Crosscut saw. Now, I do love my chainsaws. As you're probably well aware of, I use them often for a lot of things. They are a modern marvel of ingenuity. And if our founding pioneer forefathers had had a chainsaw, I think they would have settled this country twice as fast. But given that they didn't have gasoline, I guess that would have slowed them down anyway. But listen, if we had a huge economic downturn and there was no way to maintain our chainsaws with parts or even to be able to buy gasoline, I would sure want a backup plan, because at the heart of a lot of what we do on the farm is cutting some kind of wood for some reason or another. I would sure want my backup plan to be crosscut saws, both the one-man crosscut saw and the two-man. And yeah, I've got a two-man crosscut saw right here. It's got two removable vertical handles on it. But today I mainly wanted to tell you about the one-man crosscut saw in particular. I love these things. They are just beautiful. I get excited every time I see one at an auction or hanging on a wall or for sale at a flea market or an antique store. And if they're in good shape and a good price, money just comes flying out of my wallet. One of the things I like about them, I just like any tool that is a beautiful combination of metal and wood. That's just a beautiful thing to behold. I just get excited thinking about them and using them and fixing them up. Now these crosscut saws they can be used for a whole lot of things. Crosscut saws of any kind, two-man or one-man, weren't really used for felling trees or cutting trees down up until the late in the 1800s. Before that, you used axes to fell trees, and then once they were on the ground, then they would use crosscut saws or saws of varying styles to buck the log into sections, either log length for sawmills or short sections for firewood. Because if you chop a tree into firewood, you're going to waste a lot of that just in the chopping each individual section. But they can be used for felling trees, even the one-man saws. They can be used for when you get a tree on the ground, bucking them up, as I said, but also limbing them, taking the limbs off the tree in preparation for using it for something else. And also for making simple cuts when you're making notches in a log building, a log cabin. As you can tell here, there's also different lengths of blades. Sometimes you have one-man that are kind of short. I've got one here in the vise is kind of short, and then some of these are a little bit longer. It really depends on the diameter of the tree. If you got a bigger diameter tree, you're going to want a bigger blade. On most crosscut saws, what you have is a cutting tooth, and then you have a raker. The raker kind of looks like a bunny rabbit. The tooth is for actually making the cut in the wood, for scoring or cutting the grain. And then the raker comes along just kind of like a chisel point and pulls that cut piece of wood out and just finishes the cut. So rakers take the wood out. The teeth are actually what's cutting the wood. So rakers and teeth are what you have in most patterns. I've got basically three patterns I wanted to show you today. This one I'm holding is called the Champion pattern, and it's made up of two teeth and then a raker. Two teeth, raker, and so forth. I've got several of those. Here's one right here, two teeth and a raker. And then you have what's called the lance tooth. You have what's called the lance tooth. I don't know why they call it that, unless it looked like a lance, or you can lance a bull with it. That would be hideous. The lance tooth is made up of four. Sometimes I've got one here that's got two teeth and then a raker, but same thing, you've got four teeth here instead of the two on the Champion, and they're a little longer. These are shaped, I guess, like a lance, a little bit longer tooth, and then a raker. Four of them and then a raker. that's the lance tooth pattern, and then you have one really similar called the perforated lance tooth, and I guess you can see why they call it that, because it's got a little perforation. It's got little holes. Basically, it's kind of like a little bridge that gives them more support to these longer teeth, I think, so they don't chatter as much when you're sawing wood. You say, well, why the different patterns? Generally speaking, you can cut just about any tree with any saw, but you know, there's the matter of good, better, or bestest. And generally the lance tooth or the perforated lance tooth are best for softwoods, pines and things like that, especially woods that have a little bit of resin in them. The champion tooth is probably leans toward being a little bit better for the hardwoods and things like that. So in our neck of the woods here in Arkansas, where we had used to have a large virgin pine timber growth and a pine lumber boom in the first half of the 1900s, you see a lot of these leftover lance tooth and perforated lance tooth saws at flea markets and antique stores around here. And further east you go, you may see more of the champion style tooth. Sometimes when cutting a pine, the blade would get real gummed up with pine resin or whatever, and it'd want to bind and it wouldn't cut very well. And I had an old timer, I can't remember who it was, somebody told me that they used to take empty whiskey bottles like this, and they'd take pine needles and shove them down really hard into the bottle so that they wouldn't come out. They'd have kerosene in here, or coal oil as they called it around here, and it would become sort of a paintbrush. And when the resin would get so thick that they couldn't cut anymore, they'd just take this out of their pocket, paint it down with that coal oil, and coal oil would kind of eat up the resin, and they could keep on with their saw. And then when they were through with it, they could just put it in their pocket like that. The other neat thing about these one-man crosscut saws are, in particular, the handles. Now, the two-man saws have the two vertical handles on either end, and a one-man crosscut saw has the regular D handles that you'd see normally on hand saws like this, but they also can have the vertical handle as well. And again, these are detachable. You can take these off pretty simply just by unscrewing it and that one's on there. Somebody tampered with that one. Oh, here we go. They come off pretty easily, and you can see it's got a little rivet in there that's done in such a way where it won't come out, and it can open up, and there's a slot there for the blade, and then this comes down on the blade, and you just screw the handle back down and it comes down tight there. You really only need one handle because you can trade it around among all your different saws there. And just about every crosscut saw blade has a hole near the D handle and then a hole on this end. This handle can be removed and put down here. If you want it here, you've got extra support if you're just one guy doing your work, and if you put it on the other end, then two people can saw away. You've just essentially turned it into a two-man saw. These are great for kids to use if you teach them how to use them safely and not get hurt with them. Pull the Tom Sawyer on them and tell them how fun it is to cut firewood, and then let them at it, and then that frees you up to go do something fun, like haul manure. Or when I buy these at auctions or flea markets or whatever, it might be a lousy blade that I can't really refurbish. It's too pitted, it's too rusty, or the teeth are broken. But if it has a good secondary handle on it, or maybe a good D handle that I could take off and use it on other saws, or even the the nuts and the bolts there I could reuse. But this one I just made another handle there on the draw knife out of ash, I think. So I've got a nice another handle for another saw somewhere. When shopping for a good crosscut saw, the first thing I look for is the teeth. Does it have plenty of good teeth on it? It's okay if a saw might be missing one tooth. Like for instance, this is a pretty good saw here, a champion style tooth, good for hardwood, and it's missing a tooth right here. Well, that's missing 1, 2, or 3 teeth is not really a deal breaker. Now, if it were missing, half or certainly all of them, that would be terrible. But as long as it's missing one here, especially if it's down here on the end or on this end where you hardly ever get to, it's not a big deal. The next thing I would look at when buying one is the amount of rust, because normally they're usually rusty. I mean, people now generally use these for decoration and for wall hangers on your living room wall, or even worse, on an outdoor wall where the weather can get to it and rust it. This one here has a mild bit of rust, and that's no problem to get that off. This one has even milder amount of rust on it. You can see I paid $15 for that one. And also note it has a homemade handle. Somebody just got real inventive and riveted in a bent piece of metal, and he could stick a handle in that and just keep on sawing. I love these old farm repairs. One day I'm going to start a museum of old funny farm repairs. Now this one, well, we got one here that's got a very, very mild little coating of rust on it. And then this one has probably got the most rust of all. You can see in areas where it's kind of pitted, the rust has gotten down so far that it leaves little pits on it. It can still be used if the teeth are in okay condition, but you're not going to be able to get that, get it down to perfectly shiny like it was when it was new. So that matters as to how much you want to pay for it. Sometimes when I buy a saw, if it's got bad teeth, I may not even want it for the blade itself. Now you can take these blades and cut them out and make knives, good butcher knives and things, so the blade might still be valuable even if the teeth are broken. But maybe it has the nuts and the bolts on it, because sometimes I'll buy a saw and it's missing 1 or 2, and I'll collect them and keep them up here for extras in case I need them for other saws. Or you might find, well, this one's got a good handle, this one doesn't. I'll take this handle off, put it on this good blade, and swap them around, or just whatever. Or maybe it has a good vertical blade on it that you'd want to use. There's several ways you can get rust off an old blade and rejuvenate it or renovate it. And one of the simplest is just a vinegar bath. You need a long plastic container, a trough or something that'll hold it. But you soak this in vinegar overnight and take it out of that vinegar, dry it off, put a coating of oil on there, and maybe even give it a good sanding with a fine grit paper or emery cloth, and it'll bring that nice sheen back to it. And then leave that little residue of oil on there and it won't re-rust. Some of these I buy, the handle is in not so great shape. Some of them a little worse, as you can see. If it's got a missing handle or whatever, you can take a pattern of another handle and draw it off and cut you a new handle out of whatever you wanted, oak, maple, or ash, any of those things. Here's another, a repair there where somebody took some of that old style tape, cloth tape, and just wrapped it around and around and kept on sawing. This one's not too bad. It's missing a bolt and nut here, and look at that repair. He just put a nail in it from this side, bent it over, and kept on going with it. I kind of like the way some of these handles look the way they are, but if you wanted, you can clean it up and get the old varnish off or the residue, sand it up, make it look nice and new if you like that. Then put some boiled linseed oil on them, let that soak in. One of the best patinas on handles, as far as I'm concerned, is human sweat. You know, it comes from using it a lot, and it just puts a patina on there. Maybe with just a touch of blood mixed in, you know, the unfortunate accident. Linseed oil overnight. Sweat takes a few years to get that looking good. So these are a few of the saws that I have, one-man saws I have laying around. Can you really have too many one-man crosscut saws? Perhaps, and I probably do. You buy a new saw, or new to you, 70 years old, new to you, you take it out and you start sawing and you find, well, it's not sawing real good. You get down maybe this far into the log or whatever, and it kind of binds up and it won't go either way anymore. It may need a touch-up sharpening. To do that, I'll put a blade in a vise. I can just put it in a shop vise like this, and whoops. And I'll use a couple of 1-inch boards. I'll sandwich the blade into the boards and then put it in a vise and crank down on it, and then you can hold it very firmly while you take just a simple, not a big one, just a small file like that, and you can get in and get your bevel back on those teeth. Now each tooth, this is a tooth. Each tooth has a bevel on one side. There's a bevel here on this edge and a bevel on this edge of that tooth. The next tooth would have a bevel on this side, the opposite side. So when you've got it in the vise here, you're only going to be able, from this side, I'm only going to be able to file the bevel on that tooth on that side, the bevel on this side, and then I skip the next tooth because I'd have to get it to it from the other side and then do the next one, that bevel, this bevel, and then so on down. When you get them, half of them done, you flip it around in the boards and then you can do the other half. And so, but when you're filing that bevel, you want to get just the right bevel, and to tell, you can make a pass, and if the whole entire bevel is shiny, you know you've got the right angle. If only one side is shiny, then your angle may be off. Bring it back until the whole bevel is nice and shiny. And that's really what you want. You're just wanting to shine up that bevel and get a new clean edge. Don't keep grinding on it because you might file it down lower than the other teeth. You want all these teeth the same height for it to work well. Once you get all the teeth touched up and you think, well, I did a pretty good job on that, you go out and you try it out and you're at your sawbuck and you start sawing again, and if it still binds up, the next thing to look at is you may need to pay some attention to the set of the teeth. And what that is every blade is made from just one thin sheet of metal. It's very, very thin. And they just cut those teeth out in whatever pattern. Well, if you tried to saw with those teeth just like that, it really wouldn't do much but scratch the wood up. It's not going to cut. You're going to need to bend this tooth this way and this tooth this way and every other tooth all the way down so that it's cutting a wide curve so that the rest of the blade can come through that curve. And so to do that, you've got to have set. The set means you've got it bent that much at a certain angle. And it's very slight. It's not really something, it's not very drastic. It's just a very subtle thing. And there's a couple of ways, well, maybe more, to set the tooth. One of them uses an anvil, kind of like this. Now this can even be done out on the field. It's got a little point on it so that you could drive this down into a stump out in the field, and you would set your blade. This anvil, the main part of the blade sits here, and then this face right here that you pound on has a slight dip this way, has a slight angle to it that way, so that when you lay that tooth right on the anvil face and then you give it a little pound, it'll slightly bend that tooth this way. The other way to set a tooth is with special little devices. It kind of looks like a set of pliers, and it kind of is a set of adjustable plier, and it's got a face on it, and you could put that tooth in there that way, press down on it, and it slightly bends that tooth. the question becomes, how far do I know to bend that tooth to set it? Well, some smart person somewhere come up with a little gauge to be able to measure that. It kind of looks like a spider. That's what it's called, a spider gauge. And you can set this gauge on a tooth just like that, and if it rocks one way or the other, that tells you if the tooth is too far down or too far up. When that tooth doesn't rock at all, there's no sound, then it's set just right. So you imagine how time consuming that is to hit this tooth, check it, oh, got to bring it back a little bit, or got to hit it a little more, and check each one all the way down, then turn it around and do the other one. Is very time consuming. But once you do it, take it back out to your log, try sawing, and hopefully it'll do just fine. And you've got a good touched up saw with good set, and you can saw away to your heart's content. If a saw has major problems, and I have seen them have major problems, meaning the teeth are lower than the raker, or every tooth is different. A saw can be refurbished. It can be brought back to life, but it's a long process. You got to file all the teeth, the rakers, all down until every one of them has a flat top, and then you got to go in by hand and file every tooth until it gets this. It's very time consuming, but it can be done. That's the good news. So when you're shopping for one, try to get one that has, that'll at least get you in the ballpark and get you sawing. I guess that will just about do for my favorite tool, the one-man crosscut saw. I want to thank you very much for watching, and I wish you happy farming, and I'll talk at you later.